I thought I would begin by entering in a kind of an exploration of deeper levels of reality which are not part of our normal experience. And after wandering around in this space, we can then perhaps focus on certain areas which are more interesting for you in particular, or where you have some particular inclination. There's a very interesting experiment ongoing, which is based in Princeton University, which measures the vibrations of atoms, but distributed all over the earth. So the last that I saw, they had 65 special dedicated measuring instruments spread out over the earth, little device that you plug into a computer, which measures the vibration of a single atom and amplifies that. And in general, we say the vibration is random. And so you have 65 streams of random vibration, which are then sent across the internet to a central computer, which combines them all to create an overall random stream. And they do a mathematical analysis over the randomness to measure how much order or how much randomness is there. And as there is an increase in the order, the graph goes up. As there is increase in randomness, the graph goes down. So overall, a combination of random streams gives you a random graph. So it's all very simple, very physical, material. Except that we observe on certain special occasions, the graph seems to go up for an unusually long period. It does not stay random. And then it falls back to its random patterns. And after observing some of these patterns, they discovered that whenever there is a gathering of minds, a large number of people thinking the same thing or feeling the same thing, the graph seems to go up. So in cases of natural disasters, this is obvious. When there was a tsunami here in the Bay of Bengal some 10 years ago, at the time that the tsunami occurred and there was destruction and death of perhaps 150,000 people across the coasts, the graph did not go up. But when the pictures hit the media, people began to watch on television, and suddenly there was an emotional response, a common response across millions of viewers. The graph began to go up. And as the news faded, it also began to come down. In other examples, when there is a World Cup football match, which is being broadcast live, 1 billion people are watching the same game, probably a lag of 2 or 3 seconds by the time it is broadcast. And when you see somebody rushing towards a goal, there's a tension. Everyone is on the edge of their seat. And 1 billion minds are synchronized in the tension. And then suddenly he shoots, either he hits or he misses, and all these 1 billion minds fall back. At the moment when the minds combine, the graph goes up. And the moment there is a stop, the graph falls back. On New Year's Eve, where were you on New Year's Eve? And you were in meditation, perhaps? Or you were sleeping? Okay. So on the stroke of the midnight, 10 seconds before, all the party goers are watching the clock, and there is a countdown. And as you count down, 10, 9, 8, 7, your mind is tuned together to that same thing. And at that point, the graph goes up. When it hits midnight, people break out in cheer, and the collective field breaks, and the graph falls again. Interestingly, you would say, but midnight is different in different parts of the world, right? Interestingly, we watch this as a wave across time zones. Because these 65 measuring instruments are spread out over the earth, you can see the wave of alignment move across time zones. And all this is measured by a physical instrument, by a very physical process. In fact, if we ask ourselves, what is it that's being measured? The vibration of a physical atom. And yet we seem to be tuning in into a mind field. And so the name of the experiment is Global Consciousness Project. And their website is Noosphere. Noosphere represents the mind field of the earth. .princeton.edu. Can you guess, in the last 20 years that the experiment is going on, when was the highest peak of the graph? What incident in the last 20 years you would recall as being most intense for the whole world emotionally? 9/11. On that day, the plane struck local time around 9 a.m. onwards. When the news hit, but it was within an hour, within half an hour in some cases, and the graph went up to the highest ever in the history of the experiment, and it stayed up almost 3 days and gradually declined on the third day and then went back to its normal oscillations. And if you remember the event, for 3 days there was a sync with the whole earth. We felt one as a humanity in this response to the attack. But what was fascinating was the graph actually began to go up a day before. And this is something which is confusing for the scientists who are overseeing the experiment. All the other measurements, we see the graph go up as people align. In this one case, which was the highest and most intense event, we saw the graph beginning to rise almost 12 hours before. How do you explain that? In our own personal experience, you will notice there are events where something surprises us, shocks us, someone shouts boo from just around the corner, or something falls with a loud crash and you jump out of your skin as if. But if you observe the moment of your shock, you will notice there is as if some part within you which began to brace even before you heard the sound. If you've been in deep sleep and someone shouts or something falls and you wake up because of the sound, if you're very observant, you will notice before you heard the sound, some part of you began already to wake up, as if sensing that a shock is about to hit, and it had already begun to brace. And this happens to us at an individual level. And what the experiment measured was such a response, bracing response at a collective level of humanity. And it was most visible on that occasion because of the nature of the shock, which was so intense and so large in its collective impact. And this opens to us two very different dimensions of exploration. The first, that on a material level, measuring a material atomic vibration, we are as if responding to mind and emotional states of the collectivity, of humanity. This is one direction of exploration. And the second is this collective mind of humanity. It's not even our individual mind. The collective mind of humanity is as if able to sense an impending future. In that case, about 12 hours. 12 hours ahead, it knew something is going to hit. And these are things which are not explained by current science. Current physical science has its roots historically in a strong reaction to the church, to religion. And in the process, it became materialist to a point of denying anything other than what is tangible materially. In practice, though, as the science has developed, it has on its own discovered realities which are non-material and for which it has no suitable explanation. As you are aware, probably, at subatomic levels, they describe realities which are completely irrational. Things are connected across great distances, and they speak of particles being entangled across millions of miles, communication faster than light, and a kind of an underlying unity which binds all subatomic particles together, for which there is no explanation. And science itself, to this day, cannot explain simple things like a magnetic field or an electric field. We describe it, we don't explain it. We do not explain gravity, we just describe it. And so we are discussing realities which are intangible, but which are very much a part of science. Interestingly, the deeper you go into science, the less material reality becomes. At the very root of things, the reality is non-material. So abstract that we can only have some approximations of mathematics. Even the quantum equations are only not exact equations, they are approximations of reality. Reality seems to defy logic and rationality. So you come back in a way, a kind of a full circle. You began by denying those realities which are non-material, and you come back with describing non-material realities which are non-rational or trans-rational, supra-rational. Not irrational though. There is some order, some structure to it all. And so through this experiment, we have come to a very concrete contact with those domains of reality. So let's now step out beyond what materialist science can tell us and explore a domain which is in between, scientific nevertheless, logical nevertheless, which has been tried and tested across at least 10,000 years. And that's the knowledge of yoga. Yoga maps out these domains of reality, not only objectively in the universe, but subjectively within us. It gives you a technology by which you can experience those domains of reality. You can enter in relation with them and activate their influence even on material levels, including the biological level, your own body. So yoga maps out the mind-body connection, the emotion-body connection, emotion-mind connection, and something even beyond mind, spirit, which science has a very big problem with accepting. So from the yogic perspective, this experiment shows us that not only each one of us has a mind, but that there is a kind of a collective combined mind field. Yoga goes so far as to say there is a level beyond which the collective mind or the cosmic reality of mind is greater than the individualized mind. At our personal experience, our individual mind feels as if connected with the cosmic mind. But at a higher level, there is a cosmic mind of which our minds are drops, specialized projections. The greater reality is one underlying continuity of a universal mind. And so when we align ourselves in thought or in feeling, there is a natural resonance. If one person here has a very strong thought, a very powerful visualization, it will influence all of us, even if we are not conscious of it. It acts on us. And if a large number of people connect in this way, then it will act even more powerfully on the rest of humanity. But what we find here is even on matter. And the reason yoga says is because all reality is part of one continuity, one continuum, perhaps gradations or degrees in that continuum, but a continuum nevertheless. And therefore, everything influences everything. So the atoms here influence our thought, but our thoughts equally influence the atoms, perhaps less, but still they do. And in our biology in particular, within the human being, not just the body, but the human being, all these levels are deeply interconnected. So deeply that if we inject the bloodstream with certain chemicals, you'll find the mind becoming fuzzy. You lose consciousness, we say. On the other hand, if your mind concentrates on something, it affects the content of the bloodstream. So there is a two-way connection from mind to body and affecting physiological processes. It is this which the experiment is measuring at an atomic level. Now, in the human body, the connection is obvious. It is so explicit. But even at the level of the atom, there is a connection because all reality is connected. The influence may be very small, but this experiment is able to isolate it. That's the speciality of this experiment. But how small is the influence? So there was a scientist at MIT who set out to prove once and for all that the so-called psychic powers don't exist. And so he's designed what to him was the most rigorous experiment. He had a machine with 1,000 ball bearings, tiny little steel balls, set up evenly. And with a push of a lever, the thing would tilt and release 1,000 ball bearings. There were channels cut through which they could bounce and eventually assemble into two buckets equally. So when they bounce around, there's a lot of randomness, and evenly they spread, half here, half there, with some variation of 0.5% each time. And then he said, let's have somebody who claims to have psychokinetic powers to sit before this machine, push the lever, and concentrate for 1 or 2 seconds that it takes for the balls to fall, and try to will the balls to fall more in one bucket than the other. Would it work? Well, so they claim, so let's test it out. And this is a foolproof experiment. And so he had this psychic sitting there, pushed the lever, concentrating. And interestingly, every time they asked the psychic to concentrate, to push balls more into one bucket or the other, he succeeded. The tilt was remarkable. It was like, instead of 50% and 50%, it would be 60%, 40%, or 65%, 35%, and tilting according to whatever he's asked to do. Then the scientist extended the experiment further. He picked people at random from the streets and said, please join the experiment, do this. And we found that the common person, that's you and I, with no special powers, can tilt the balance significantly, 55% to 45%, without any special training, without any special capability. All of us have in our mind the capacity to influence material processes just by willing. Amazing, isn't it? And if that's happening out there, what's happening inside us? At a molecular level, where so many things are happening 24 hours within our personal mind field and emotional field. And we obviously are influencing those things for a long time. So with these two experiments, we see a connection. But let's see the implications of these experiments. So in the first case of the Global Consciousness Project, if our common united thought is able to influence the vibrations of those atoms, consider what's actually happening. We measured 65 atoms, but what's happening to all the rest of the atoms? They are also being affected, right? So in one case, when they had a collective prayer, you probably get emails once in a while of somebody saying, let's all concentrate on such and such a day for world peace. And if ever you've actually sat down and did it, the experiment measured that difference. It actually makes a difference at the level of vibrations of atoms. But which atoms? All the atoms of the earth. We happen to be measuring 65 selected atoms in those little devices, but every atom is being influenced. And so if right here all of us are in a state of concentration, all the atoms here of all matter are coming in alignment, in synchronicity, with less randomness. Now what does that mean physically? If in a whole space, a region of a city, we are in better harmony mentally and emotionally, the physical atoms are vibrating in greater harmony, and that means physical, geophysical processes of the earth will be more harmonious. If we are in chaos, then the geophysical processes of the earth will be in greater chaos. In other words, earthquakes would be more devastating. Weather patterns would be more unstable. Whereas if we are in alignment, weather patterns would be more harmonious. Not only harmonious among themselves, but in harmony with us. And if there is an earthquake, if at all there is an earthquake, it would be less destructive. And this is the physical reality, physical effect of our state. And this is true for the whole earth and for all humanity in relation to the earth. The second implication is the part of the earth that you most influence constantly would be where you live. But which is the part closest to you, which is always with you? Your own body. So the state of mind in which you are will have a huge influence on your biological processes. Irrespective of the physiological connections, just the thought process will have an effect. So if your mind is chaotic, your molecular processes in the biology would tend to be more chaotic. If your mind is in harmony, in sync, more quiet, perhaps less agitated, your biological processes would eventually reflect that with greater harmony in the biology, which is expressed as better health. Your physical health actually is a reflection of your state of mind. In the very interesting outcome of this experiment over 20 years is that we see over 20 years the overall randomness is dropping. It's a very important discovery. That means overall in humanity, we seem to be increasingly in sync. And that gives us hope for the future of the earth and for humanity. If one person, therefore, let's push the logic further, one person, therefore, can create a very strong vibe of harmony and project that, it will influence not only atoms, but also other minds, but also the processes of nature. And we see examples of this in what is called the yajna, the fire ceremony of the Veda, in which certain invocations are chanted as they pour an offering in the fire. It looks like just a fancy ritual. But in one of the very rarely conducted yajnas, which involves 1,000 different fires, they had scientists measuring the atmosphere around. And they discovered during the process of the yajna, the overall bacteria count dropped in the air. And this is a physical effect of chanting mantras with a fire. Let's look at the other extreme. During a solar eclipse, which may have lasted 15 minutes, bacteria count tripled in the atmosphere. How do you explain that? Well, the scientists would say because the sun is covered by the moon, therefore the ultraviolet rays are less, they are blocked out, so the bacteria count goes up. But it doesn't triple even at night. But during the solar eclipse, something happened which triples the bacteria count. How do you explain that? You will notice in almost all the ancient traditions, they consider solar eclipse to be an inauspicious occasion. In India, they will tell you as children that during the solar eclipse, you should not go out, you should not look at the sun, all that is fine, but you should not eat food or drink water. And if there is any food which is left over, which stayed during the solar eclipse, you throw it out. You do not eat it. And preferably, you are seated in meditation during that time. Well, bacteria count going up is only one effect. What's really happening which is causing the bacteria count to go up? And the occult tradition says that Earth, Sun, and Moon are as if linked. They're all three symbolic. The physical reality is a symbol of a subtler truth. The sun here representing the higher spiritual domains, the moon representing the intermediate astral domains, and the physical earth representing the material domain. And when they come into alignment, there's an alignment of energies across the three. And especially during the solar eclipse, the domain of which is astral is as if compressed and brought close to the material world. And it's very easy to make the passage from one side to the other. And there are beings from the astral world who gain access to the material world. And when they try to fool around, then animals sense them. And that's the reason why dogs start howling during the eclipse. Well, that's what the occult tradition says. But what you see physically is the pressure of that influence triples the bacteria count suddenly. During the fire ceremony of the Veda, which purifies the atmosphere, invokes peace, the bacteria count reduces. And so you see some consistency across all these different narrations. Recently, the scientists have developed much finer tools for observing life forms and bacteria. In a single glass of water, they say 10 million bacteria, but good bacteria. They keep the water clean. In the piping system of the city, it's full of bacteria, which earlier we could not measure. Now we can because of the more sensitive instruments. And the quantum of bacteria is huge, in the billions. But they're all good bacteria. They maintain the cleanliness of the water. Interesting idea. But they discovered also the region around a human being is full of bacteria. What we call the aura in the occult traditions is now measured by scientists as being a zone containing bacteria, but which are specific to each person. The pattern of bacteria is a reflection of you uniquely. By observing that pattern, one can identify a person. It's as unique as a fingerprint. How do you explain that? You move across the room. If it was just a cluster of things in the air, it would get blown away, right? It would take a few hours for it to spread and form a new layer. But this layer seems to follow you as you move. How do we explain that? From an occult perspective, if we ask ourselves, what are bacteria? What are viruses? We find something interesting. The way the mother explained it here, she said that bacteria are the material impression of things which belong to the subtle physical, subtler worlds. And so, strong negative ideas in the subtle domain, in the astral domain, will imprint themselves in the material domain to form these patterns of energy that we call bacteria. Equally strong positive emotions and thoughts would imprint themselves to form bacteria, which we would call good bacteria, versus the negative energy bacteria, which we would call bad bacteria. Interesting idea. So the bacteria count and the kind of bacteria is in a sense a measure of the vibrations imprinting in the material from the astral. So I leave this particular field of exploration. Perhaps it's already surprising enough. Look at the other side. From the Global Consciousness Project, this idea that something in us can sense the future. Not only that we can sense the future, we can also sense things which are far away, beyond the line of sight. And this is demonstrated through a series of experiments involving what they would call remote viewing, to see things from far. So there were always people who claimed to be able to see things at a distance. And there were experiments done in the 70s in particular, which were funded by the CIA. They said, if it's true, well, then we should be able to militarize it. We should be able to spy on other countries. And the reason for doing it was they discovered that Russia had 30 different units experimenting in this field. And the CIA said, we are far behind. We need to start now. So they set Stanford Research Institute a project to explore whether there was validity to remote viewing. They picked in particular two famous remote viewers. Well, they became famous later. One of them was a policeman who claimed he used this power to catch criminals. And they put them through rigorous testing. They would hide things in envelopes and have them say what was in the envelope. So one of them in particular, Ingo Swann, he said, this is all boring. Let's do something more useful. Let me tell you the weather in a different city. And those were days without the internet. So you had to phone somebody and find out the weather. And they found that he was able to describe the weather accurately. And then it went on greater distances. And then they discovered very often he would pick things before they happened. He seemed to be able to see an event before it actually happened with a time lag. And so they began to explore that. And they discovered for the remote viewing faculty, space or time did not matter. You could go far into the past or the future with as much ease as you could go to a greater or lesser distance. And at one point, Ingo Swann said, well, I need to really break away from these boring lab experiments. So the NASA had sent a spacecraft to go to Jupiter. It would be the first time that a craft would photograph Jupiter from close by. And Ingo said, well, let me remote view Jupiter. And so he went through his process and described 12 different experiences in Jupiter, including he described a layer, well, he described the surface of Jupiter being metallic almost, but soft, semi-liquid metallic. He described mountains which are 30,000, was it 30,000 meters high or feet high. And he described a belt like a ring around Jupiter, which had never been seen from the Earth. And there were 12 such descriptions. Of the 12, 9 were confirmed by the spacecraft of NASA within a few months. And so they had him do other experiments, projecting him to the moon and things like that, all of which gave remarkably precise results. But subsequently, the CIA developed a technology to teach people to remote view. And there are many demonstrations of this. In one of the methods taught, they don't care who you are, what your background is, what your capacity is. In fact, if you're a complete novice, it works better. So they make you go through a process, a protocol of steps. And you don't care what those steps do. You just follow the instructions. At the end of it, you have an image. You've ended up drawing an image of the thing which was asked to be remote viewed. And if you don't know what it was that you're remote viewing, your accuracy is better. If you actually are told this is what you're going to remote view, your accuracy drops because you imagine things. Your power of imagination cuts across the power of direct perception. And so for the training of remote viewing, you are asked not to imagine, not to think. And it's better you don't know what it is that you're supposed to be remote viewing. And so how do they connect you with the location itself? They reduce the location to a set of numbers. So this began when they were trying to spy on Russia. They gave coordinates, longitude and latitude numbers. And the moment the numbers were read out, Ingo Swann would have his perception kick in and he would draw a picture, describe emotions, describe people. Then he could be asked, go here, go there, look here. And he would, as if he's right there, observing, moving around and describe things. But so they found after a while that the actual number didn't matter. So there was somebody who came from the NSA to test this out. He said, this is impossible. So he said, I have put a note in an envelope, which I want you to tell me what's in that. A picture, I think, a picture in the envelope, and tell me what it is. As it turned out, he had forgotten to bring it. So the remote viewers said, no problem. We will ask, what's in the envelope that you forgot to bring? That's going to be the question. And the question is then communicated to you as a series of numbers. You write on a paper this question and then put a series of numbers. And you read out the numbers to the person who is remote viewing. As he hears the numbers, he starts the process and he ends up with a description of what's in the envelope which you forgot to bring. Amazing, isn't it? The power of remote viewing, the power of perception, can actually navigate through space and time through connections of connections. Now, this seems unusual for a scientist who's used to thinking only in terms of physical connections. But it is not at all unusual for those of us who have had experiences with spiritual people. So in the ashram, for example, we had events, situations where a telegram would come from a known person. So and so is sick. So and so in my family is very sick. Please, we seek your intervention. And the message would be taken to the mother, and there would be a help which would go immediately. So sometimes the person would say something like, my brother's cousin in this particular city is sick, and please help. Now, the mother sitting there has not any physical contact, does not know the person, does not even have a name. But when she puts out the energy to help, it connects. How do you explain that? Sometimes you're asked to give a specific name. And the moment the name is mentioned, it creates this sense of a connection, a link. and the help goes. That's enough. Where is the person? We don't care. Who is the person? We don't care. The name itself and the intent that came is the link to the person. And in remote viewing, it is found this exactly happens. So sometimes the military would give remote viewing assignments where the remote viewers had no idea and no way to validate. Just a number would come, they do a reading, and the images are sent, and the military does its analysis. That's it. Complete insulation from the person who's perceiving and the person who is asking the question. And still it works. Amazing, isn't it? And we see demonstrations, people picked up from the road at random, made to go through this protocol, and they come up with an image unusually accurate. So that ability is within all of us. What prevents it from working directly? The imagination, the activity of the mind, the expectations, the preconceptions which we have, all of these are acting as layers, blocking some part in us which has the power of direct perception. And the method used in the protocol is a method intended to bypass all these things which come in between. The method is, in fact, a kind of a negative method. It removes things which would come in the way and just gets you to feel physically what's the sensation that you have, and you describe that, and that's it. You have got the picture. So in this way, the military trained people for remote viewing. They had teams of remote viewers, and they were active during the Operation Desert Storm, when they were tracking the military movements of Saddam Hussein's troops. They were incidentally also tracking his mind, his state of mind day to day, what he was thinking, what he was planning, what he intended to do, what were his intentions as distinct from his statements. And for remote viewing, it made no difference. Now, if you had an ability to project and perceive anywhere in space and time, what would you do? What would you want to know? And so for the remote viewers of the military, this was a fascinating exercise. They would go back home, and then they would want to do their own remote viewing sessions to answer questions. What about the Loch Ness Monster? Right? Is there life on Mars? What about all kinds of things which we're curious to know about? So, what's that? The device from the temple in Jerusalem, little box which is described in the Bible, the Ark of Covenant. Where is that? Did it really exist? What's it look like? They actually did these experiments, and they came up with very unusual descriptions. So if you're interested, you will find these things documented by the military remote viewers in books which they subsequently wrote, when officially the CIA shut down the whole exercise. And then 10 years later, they declassified all the documents. And among the documents is one in which one of their star remote viewers was asked to spy on a facility in Russia. They had a huge hangar. They were watching from satellites. They had no idea what was inside. So the remote viewer was asked to enter the hangar and describe what was in it. And he described what seemed to be a huge submarine. He was asked to measure it end to end. It was too big to be a submarine. And then he described special flaps and the missile turrets which were aligned in an inclined way, which has never been seen in a submarine. And the whole hangar was too far from the ocean's edge. Normally a submarine is constructed on the edge of the water, so it could be released. So having observed all these things, they asked the remote viewer to project himself a month in the future. What do you see after a month, after 2 months, after 3 months? And at some point, the remote viewer said, I see a series of explosions. The ground in front of the hangar is broken and water is flooding in. So now they had a date. And on that date, they had all their satellites pointing, and they watched the release of the world's largest submarine. The Russians blew up the land which was in between and released it straight into the water. Now, this is the kind of documentation we find from these declassified papers of the CIA. The experiment, they believe, still the system still continues now in secrecy. The official form of it was shut down officially, but That's it. That doesn't matter for us. What is important to be seen is all of us seem to have this power, this capacity. There are other experiments which we could also attempt, less complicated. And the easiest of them is becoming conscious in our dream. We've all had at some occasion what we call lucid dreams, where during the dream you're conscious that you're dreaming, right? And suddenly you realize you are in a dream and there's a state of excitement perhaps, or because of the excitement you wake up, or in the state of excitement you will yourself to float and you find yourself floating or flying. And it happens to us spontaneously sometimes. But you can train yourself to become conscious in the sleep state. Train yourself to have these dreams flying around, but also once you're conscious that you're dreaming, you can will your reality and reshape it. Something of this is represented in the movie Inception. You must have seen that. It's a movie where they enter into the dream world and they mold reality. It's a fascinating movie. But almost everything described there is based on actual experiences tested in the lab. So they discover, for example, that you can go levels into the dream state, and time seems to become more fluid in those states as you go deeper into the dream state. And of course, you can mold reality. And this is something very easy to do. If you will yourself to become conscious in the dream state and remember to try to play around with reality, you will find you can will a wall here, will this substance to change to become a window. Just change things like that by willing them. Generally, though, we are so thrilled by the idea of being conscious in the dream that we lose the poise of the observer status. We get sucked into the dream experience and we lose ourselves in it. Unfortunately, when we wake up, we don't seem to be able to recall everything in the dream. And that's another interesting part. You had a dream vividly. When you woke up in the morning, you remembered it. If you're lucky, you made a note of it. And after about half an hour, you look at those notes and you say, "What's this? I don't remember." There's a transition in which, crossing a barrier of consciousness, you lose memory of the dream state. Just as during the dream state, you lose memory of your waking state. That's your reality. You forget that there is another reality from which you made a transition. Occasionally you remember, and in the same way, in the waking state, occasionally you remember your dream. Something happens. Oh, yeah, I forgot that I had a dream last night. But this situation awakens the memory. It's happened to you? It's as if the memory was there, it was hidden behind layers, and somehow this experience or this situation exposed it and it popped out. So we notice that there are layers of consciousness that our waking consciousness is completely unaware of. It has its own memory, and there are gaps through this wall which separates these two layers, and through the gaps sometimes things pop out. So you will notice, though, as you're sliding into sleep, you can recall yesterday's dream, or you can recall details of it which you had forgotten. So it's as if you're shifting from one memory bank to another memory bank, and with a gap in between. But the gap is a gap of awareness, consciousness. Memory is a faculty of consciousness. Wherever you're conscious, you have memory. So there's an inner memory, there's an outer memory, because there's an inner consciousness and an outer consciousness. But the gap in between can be healed. You can train yourself to make a conscious transition both ways. Those who meditate regularly make that passage of going deep and coming out consciously. They will find it much easier to remember their dreams, because some passage of awareness is built already, a kind of a bridge. But you can widen that bridge as part of your meditation practice. Rather than going rapidly deep and then coming out rapidly, you go in between step by step, and at each layer you as if widen your awareness, make it more explicit, more conscious. And then you will find the memories of the dream come very easily, very quickly, all the way to the surface with very little effort. And then if you pursue this line, you will find it's possible to have continuity of memory all the way from the point where you fell asleep till you woke up. And you can even have a continuity of awareness that you're dreaming all the way through the night. It's a very different kind of awareness because it's a highly interiorized state. It's a different kind, a type of awareness. It's not this kind of explicit I am conscious awareness. And yet you're conscious, differently conscious. It feels vague, it feels formless, because that is a domain where form is not so rigid. The material world is the domain of form primarily. And as you come out, things begin to crystallize and harden into distinct forms. As you go in, the forms become more fluid, more vague, and you're as if wandering in a formless, unidentifiable domain. And that's the reason why we think it's vague, it's unreal, it's dreamy, it's fantasy. But it is as real as this. It's just fluid in form. And that's the reason why in dream state you can also shape reality so easily. So if we habituate ourselves to be in that fluid form domain and get used to it, then we can do many interesting things over there. But so the point I'm getting to is you can have continuity of awareness through the night till you wake up. And I have a friend who's a monastic monk in the Ramakrishna tradition. He said he developed this very early on in his life with the explicit intention that this part will remain aware that he is dreaming. And if something happens in the dream that he doesn't like, he can choose to change the dream, to shut down that thought and shift to a different thought. Very easy, very simple. Once trained, the faculty remains with you as long as you continue it. If you don't develop it sufficiently and neglect it for long enough, it begins to fade again because that whole domain is plastic. You create a passage of continuity of consciousness. If you don't keep it clear, it closes gradually. So these are all part of our current reality. It's just that we're not conscious of it. There's actually a pure action of our five senses, not tied to our body. So when you see something right now, the light hits your eyes, converts to electricity, which goes to the brain, where there's a whole pattern of electrical impulses. Where is the seeing taking place? Which is the part where you say, ah, I see. Not in the eyes, not in the iris, not in the layer where the light comes, not in the optic cord. In the brain, that's not your experience either. There's some part of you which is not machinery, which is pure awareness that says, I am aware, I see. That part is not brain. When that part sees, it is a pure awareness that sees. Right? That's our experience subjectively. So from the yogic perspective, we will say the true instrument of sight is not the eyes, it is mind. Mind is the sixth sense. And as the sixth sense, it unifies all five senses. The similar experience when you hear. Do you hear inside your ears? Do you hear in the eardrum? Do you hear in the nerve which connects to the brain? Do you hear in the brain? None of these. The hearing is of awareness. Your awareness tunes in and you hear, right? So the mind is the true sense instrument which attaches itself to the brain and through the machinery of the body looks through these five senses. And so your whole perception of the world is coming in through these very narrow channels of the senses, but feeds eventually into mind, which is not bound to body. Although connected to, it is not bound to. And you can train your mind's senses, therefore, to disengage from the body and look directly. And that would be what they described as remote viewing. or clairaudience, clairvoyance. And because it is mind which sees deeply, it can also see things which are not of the material domain. It can see realities of the subtler worlds as easily as the material. And that's why a clairvoyant, while seeing the material reality, may describe little angelic beings or fairies. And around flowers and plants, they will describe these little beings which come and look after them. They will describe beings who preside over certain species of animals or trees, or just disembodied beings who are wandering around and doing their own thing. And interestingly, in all these experiences, when you or the clairvoyant sees them, they are surprised. They're surprised because they are used to people not being able to see them. And when someone sees them, there is a connection of awareness, and they register that, they see that you see them. And this is what you will find in all these descriptions. But on the other side, these little dwarfs and angelic beings in nature, they don't like human beings. They hide from human beings. If you walk into the forest, they scurry away. Why? Because our consciousness is too violent, too aggressive, too intense for them. They're so gentle, so fragile, so sensitive. And so, in order to be able to see them, there's a first requirement: you should become absolutely quiet and still, like them. And then the second requirement, you should ask their permission. You should ask them, can I see you? Will you reveal yourself to me? Otherwise, they would rather stay away. It's very similar to meeting birds in the forest. When human beings come, they hear the sound, they want to run away. But if you become very quiet and they get used to you, they trust you, then they will come near, they will come closer. And if you can build a deeper bond of trust, love, which is not part of our human domain, it's a level of purity and subtlety which is not normal to us, then they may even come to you and sit on your hand. As happens in rare cases of, we say, saints or people in meditation in the forest. They are in deep meditation, they open their eyes and they find a whole set of little animals playing around. But during that state of meditation, they put out vibrations which were so comfortable to those beings. And so these are things which belong to our capacity, but which are blocked out because of the coarseness, hardness, denseness of our surface consciousness, but which we can change consciously, refine, subtilize, make more conscious, bring into them the vibrations of our own deeper states. And when we glow out those states, then those beings around us also respond differently. I was describing the perception of the mind to be able to see directly, to hear directly. We find, for example, certain animals, dogs, for example, can smell. You can give them a handkerchief used by somebody. They will follow the scent all the way to the person's house. How does that work? The person drove by car. There's no question of a line of scent left on the ground. Even if the person walked home, the scent is being blown away by the wind all the time. What is it that the dog follows? The physical explanation does not work. The dog is sensing something else and uses the scent as a point of focus of awareness to sense something which is beyond physical scent. But the same thing can also be done with hearing. And you can do this as an experiment. Listen carefully, become very quiet and listen carefully, and then try to extend the distance of the sounds that you hear. Easiest to do at night, when there are less sounds. But you'll find after a while, you will feel as if you can hear things which are far, far away, which you were not able to hear before. It's as if a part of your hearing consciousness, the sense which focuses through the hearing, reaches out a great distance and actually hears things which are too far for the physical sound to reach you. And the same thing can be done with sight. or even with smell, taste, or touch. And this actually happens to us. Sometimes you look at some object and you feel yucky. You've had that feeling? Something in you goes, "Eee," gives me the willies just looking at it. Or you look at somebody who's hurt quite badly. There's some mangling of the body. You look at them and you feel weird. Why? Because some part of your consciousness actually makes contact when you turn your attention there. And that part making contact feels so weird, it pulls back. The ability is inherent in us. It's just not conscious. It is subliminal, behind the domain of awareness. And a whole range of possibilities exist in that domain. So, in the vocabulary we use here, we describe the human being in these terms. We have three parts of our being: the mind, the life energies, prana, and then the biology, the body, physical body, gross body. These three are superimposed in the sense that they're entangled into each other. Our mind, life energies, and body are so deeply connected, each one influences the other two. But this is only on the surface that they're entangled. The mind itself, remember, is a part, it's a projection of one cosmic mind. So there's a layer which disengages from the personal entanglement and leans towards a wider, freer cosmic awareness. That intermediate layer we will call the subliminal or inner mind. Although it's connected to the surface narrow personality, it rests on the base of a wider, freer cosmic mind. And in the same way, our personal life energies, although plugged in into the body mind on the surface, lean back to open to a universal life force which is flowing everywhere. And in the transition point, there is a stage where you experience a freer, wider life energy, which can then draw on the universal energy and very quickly rejuvenate, refresh yourself, even though the surface biology may be tired. And in the same way, the physical substance of our body also opens out and connects to the universal physical substance. And there's a transition point of something which is subtle, and we call it the subtle physical. It has the denseness of materiality, but it has the character of being subtle enough that you cannot see it, although you can feel it, feel its impact. And it is this level of substance that mediums described as ectoplasm, if you've heard the term, which exudes from the body during mediumistic trances and is the material from which they form things, or which is the substance which projects from the physical hand or body to push and move an object physically. If you've ever seen videos of people, they point to an object and they push it. There's actually a projection extending of this subtle physical substance which nudges. And this substance extends in a very dense layer about 1 centimeter around the body, and it's like a protective armor, preventing illnesses from entering. If that is strong, dense, energetic, you don't fall sick. When that becomes weak, develops holes, patches, or becomes jaded in its energy, then through those holes, through those patches, illnesses enter the body. Have you ever had the experience that you felt you were about to catch a cold, and just on that edge you could as if push it away, will it away, and then it went away, it stopped bothering you? But if at that point you give in, or you feel it has pushed through and suddenly it's crossed a boundary, now you can't push it out anymore, then it's got in the system, you can't throw it out, and you suffer the cycle that it goes through before it's fully overcome. That's the borderline of your nervous envelope. You can become conscious of it, and when you're conscious, not only you can push back these negative influences, illnesses, but there's a finer border beyond that which extends a little bit like this, we call the aura, which includes also your mental awareness. And if you're aware of that edge, you can sense people's thoughts entering and subtler energies, and you can block them, modify them, or deal with them before they catch you. It may happen to you that you meet somebody and you come away and you find you're depressed suddenly. and you don't know why. You've just got an infection at the level of mind and energy, and it got in through that layer. And if you were conscious of it right there, you could have blocked it perhaps. Or if it was too strong and you're not strong enough to push back, then it creeps through anyway, but you will know that it's coming from outside. You will know its source, and therefore you'll be able to deal with it differently. So this is a part of our extension of our consciousness and part of our individuality. This inner mind, inner vital, and the inner physical form the larger, more plastic, more free layers of our consciousness. And that's where they open out to universality. So we have three frontal parts which are joined, three inner subliminal parts continuing, which are less joined, more free, more separate, more wide. But still, who's the person that holds it all together? And that's where we use the word, for want of a better word, soul. But the word soul has so many meanings. It's used in so many ways, generally to indicate any focus of individuality. So you say, oh, he's a good soul. But what does that mean? You're not speaking of a spiritual reality. You're speaking of a person, the individuality, the essential sense of individual. But you also have soulful music. Music which draws at your emotion strings, makes you feel nostalgic, makes you perhaps even feel sad. And you call it soulful. So that's not the soul either that we are referring to. So in order to distinguish between these three, these different types of usages, Sri Aurobindo explains that we have three souls. There is the outer soul, which he calls the desire soul. That's I, me, my. And you notice, if you have to describe yourself to somebody, let's say we meet and we are told, let's all introduce ourselves. What do you say? I am so and so from such and such a place. I do this. This is my designation. This is my work. This is my hobby. And if somebody wants to know you better, you're now chatting over dinner one-on-one, then say, tell me about yourself. What do you like to do? You see where it's going? Likes and dislikes. Or if you had to introduce a friend whom I have not met, how would you describe the person? She likes these things, does not like those things. So it's a bundle of likes and dislikes by which we define our personality. Desires, effectively, positive or negative. Dislike is just a desire, but in a negative way. It's an energy pushing rather than pulling, but it's still an energetic connection. It maps to form the surface part of your personality. And this is centered around the sense that I am, it's my life, I do. But if you observe this I, it's changing, fluctuating all the time. You know, when I was upset, I was angry, I said these things which I regret. Or while I was saying them, I knew I would regret them. I didn't want to say them, but I got carried away. You notice there are different parts within you. Even while you're getting upset and speaking things you don't want to speak, there's a part which doesn't want to speak, and there's a pull and push. And there's a part after, an hour later, when you become calm, I wish I didn't say that. So the I now sees the world differently than the I in the state of anger. The I in the morning when you wake up from sleep is different from the I when you're at your peak in thought or action or interaction with people. The social I is different from the personal I. The I with friends is different from the I at workspace. And that's changing constantly. It's a fluctuating, moving bundle of sense of identity. That is the surface ego desire soul. And it is unstable all the time, in a flux. So what's you really? And now if you start introspecting, feel deep within yourself, how would you describe yourself? To somebody that you really want to expose yourself to, whom you trust. You wouldn't do that with just any stranger. What would you say you are to somebody whom you trust truly? And how would you describe You as a person, as you know yourself, not as people know you. They don't know you. Nobody really knows you as you know yourself. So, what is it that's you? Try to think of a few words you would use to describe: kind, loving, sensitive, caring, happy, creative. All of them would be positive descriptions. And if you have a negative term, just go deeper and you'll find there's a positive behind that. And all of us would have some combination of these things, something more, something less, but which we consider to be ourselves truly. And then we will say something like, only my best friends really know me. And they took how many years to get to know you? Because this inside you, inner person, is covered in layers and layers and layers of personality. And those layers are mostly reactive layers. So because I'm sensitive, I get upset. Because I'm kind, therefore, I need to restrict myself from being too generous. You see how the reaction works. The reaction puts out a contradiction of what you actually are. But the surface most layers are the densest, hardest reactive layers. And so when you become very quiet, you are more truly you. When you're agitated and in a state of reaction, then you become the bundle of likes and dislikes which people know you to be. So, in your own personal space, when not provoked, when quiet, when relaxed, when just fresh from an exercise of asanas, yoga, meditation, you're more you, more centered, and that's when you are this person. And this Sri Aurobindo calls the inner soul. So the outer desire soul is the bundle of reaction, unstable person. The inner soul is this truer, deeper you, but it's still not the truest, because there is one more behind that of which we are not fully conscious. Ask yourself why this inner is always so positive. Where does this creativity come from? Where does this enthusiasm and joy for life come from? From where do you get the sense of an ideal that you need to realize, to fulfill, to express? Why is it that your natural state is one of love, affection, kindness, helpfulness? Where does that come from? You just know this to be the nature, but you don't know its source. And so there's a layer behind or deeper into the core of this that goes to the source of it, where you are what you feel. You don't just feel love and kindness and creativity. You are love, kindness, creativity. But kindness is no more a word, because its kindness is still an experience you have. You are compassion, oneness, something which you are, not something you do, not something you express. It's the awareness itself is love, is joy, is creative potential. And that inmost soul, that's the vocabulary Sri Aurobindo uses: outer soul, inner soul, and inmost soul. But you give a special name, he calls it the psychic being. It's that part which is truly you. It's that part that chose to take birth and entered into this mind life body complex to experience the world. It's that part which gathers the experience through life, through the life, and makes the transition into the next. It's that part which is immortal, eternal, and knows itself immortal. And therefore, it does not know fear. It knows the world as its domain, its own larger reality. And so it experiences the world as a child would his playground. Here is a space of exploration, wonderful things to discover. And it approaches life in this way. So it enters life with a great joy, with a sense of purpose, with a sense of things it wants to do, things it wants to experience and learn and grow through experience. And when it leaves the life, it withdraws, it absorbs all these into itself, more mature, more complete as a result of those experiences. It then chooses What's the next line of development I want to explore? But that's you. That's the only true you. All the rest is a reflection of you in the substance of nature. So even the inner soul is a reflection of this, more true. And the outer is clouded, mixed through so many layers, which conceal rather than reveal. Through the practice of yoga, we can cultivate our nature. By refinement, by culturing, we make these layers transparent, plastic, and responsive to the true soul. That they will begin to reveal it rather than conceal it. And as you become more and more centered in yourself and expressive of your true nature, we say this is a more authentic person, a real person, or the behavior is more true, more real because it's you expressing yourself truly without the distortions of reactions and other things. And so to discover yourself is a great liberation. There's one more layer of experience we can have. This true I is still experiencing growth. But where did it come from? In its substance, it is essentially divine. And yet it is a fragment, a drop, a seed with full potential, infinite potential perhaps, but a seed still. It's like a drop emerging from the ocean, of the nature of the ocean, capable of expressing the full quality of the ocean, but itself as if separated from the ocean. So as the inmost soul turns to its own depths, it discovers itself one with the whole, with the all, with the ocean, with the divine consciousness which presides over supporting the whole universe. And so when we experience that consciousness, we call it the self, we not only experience our oneness with the whole universe, just as we feel things. When I breathe, I feel the lungs in me. When I eat food, I feel the pressure in me, in my stomach, because I have identified with the body, though I am not body, right? In the same way, when the consciousness opens out and experiences this oneness, it experiences all things in the universe as happening within you, within yourself, within itself. And so, who is that other person? The ego will say, not me. The self will say, also me. It's my own other body. It's my own other self. These are all my own other forms. There's no one other than I. This form with which I'm currently more identified happens to be just one focal point, but I am equally spread in all. So you can do this as an experiment. You feel the full surface of your hand and then put your attention on the thumb. And when your awareness is more in the thumb, are the other fingers any less yours? Or shift your attention to the little finger, and now you're more little finger, but is the thumb any less you? And it's a similar experience one has with the whole cosmos. Not only physically, but all the levels, the subtler levels of the life energies and mind and domains in all of these are open to you as yourself, your own larger self. And the soul is a special projection of the self entering space-time to experience the journey of growth and self-discovery. And so this is the big picture of who we are. And all of this potential is as if compressed into this little person that's wandering around life, pretty much confused about why I'm here, who I am, what I'm doing. Do I really want to do what I do? How should I deal with this present situation? Because all of this is behind in those layers of which we are not conscious. And we are trapped as if locked up in a little room where we have forgotten. And yoga is the process by which we recover our consciousness, recover memory, recover continuity with what we truly are through all these layers. And that's the complete you. You can't say only the self is you. The psychic being, the mind, the life form, and the individualized personality, all these are you equally. But you're not you completely unless you experience all these in continuity. And so the journey of yoga is an exploration of these inner worlds, of which the early steps are being explored through what we call psychic phenomena, parapsychological explorations. But they are just testing the most surface waters of the ocean. The real exploration is the exploration that the yoga leads us to, the reality which we are. So this is a kind of a broad map, starting with a few very now superficial seeming experiments, but a broad map of all the possibilities within us. And I'll pause here, and perhaps you can ask questions, or you want to share an experience, and we can flow along with whatever you want.
You were saying about the common responses, we can use that for positive, human, global. Do they do experiments like that as well, where they do like try to?
Yes. So when we have these attempts for collective meditations across the earth, for whatever reason it may be, those have been observed to produce a shift, measurable shift in the global consciousness project. And so they are having a result. The question is, do enough people feel the need for something like that? As far as I understand, it does not matter if all of us are doing it together. The fact that we are aligned in that common intention is already a shift, which is synchronizing humanity, unifying us on some level of common purpose. Even if we didn't sit down to concentrate at the same time. Yes. Yes. Yes.
International Yoga Day hopefully will be.
Yes. 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 It will be interesting to see whether on the International Yoga Day we find this kind of a shift which is distinct enough. I can tell you many more interesting stories. But you can give me an indication of what you'd like to hear more about, which interests you more. Something that you're curious about.
One question is why? Why go to all this obscurification?
What
you really are.
Yes. Why this obscuring? Yes. Why did we have to obscure ourselves? Because after all, we chose it. We chose to hide. We chose to obscure ourselves. If you observe the children play certain games, the common feature of all games that little children play, with a little baby who's barely able to walk or sit, just this is such a great joy. And he'll hide behind, peek, see if you're looking at him, and immediately hide again, and then again peek, and do that again and again. What is this game? And when they grow older, the game becomes more sophisticated. We play I Spy. So someone goes, everybody hides, and one person has to look and find them. But notice the joy. First joy is in the act of hiding. The second joy is in the act of searching from one person, and the other person to remain hidden. Oh, he's coming close. Be careful. Don't make any sound. Okay. And the third joy, which is the most beautiful, is the joy of being discovered. Yeah. And at that moment, if for some reason you are not found too long, the joy begins to fade. So you move out of your very nice hiding place to some place where you will be found eventually. Right? So the purpose of the game is to be found, is to hide so that you can be found. So still the question is why? Why are these things so joyful, and why is it? These human games are a symbol of something deeper. The divine, remember, is one, infinite, indivisible oneness, pure delight. So we describe Sat, Chit, Ananda, sheer existence, which is consciousness, which is bliss. Complete, all potential there. Doesn't need anything. Autarky, completely. And yet, in that oneness is all potential and infinite potential. And in the infinite potential is the possibility of experiencing multiplicity. And multiplicity, which knows itself one, is one kind of experience. But multiplicity, which does not know itself one, is another possibility. Right? So now I'm going to take two very different descriptions. Both are true simultaneously, but you'll see how it works. From the highest poise, you look down. The part of the divine which dwells on the possibility of multiplicity to the point of forgetfulness is us. Right? Where is this universe taking place? In the oneness of the divine consciousness. It's never separate. Where is space and time? It's just relationships of the one consciousness with itself, with its infinite potential. All is in that oneness always, as are we right now in that oneness. But the part of the divine which concentrates on the multiplicity to the point of self-loss, to the point of self-forgetfulness and half-awakening, that part of him is us in these relationships. So the whole thing can be described almost like a dream. The whole world is formed as if in a dream of the divine consciousness. And we are living the dream in a kind of a virtual reality, so to say, a movie which is playing out. And so Shakespeare says, all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. We play our roles and we go out. I don't know the exact lines, but that's the truth of it. That's why that statement is so powerful. Seen from that point of view. But there's another way of looking at it. In that infinite potential, because everything is bliss, finally, because it's made of the same consciousness of bliss, there is the possibility of bliss of dwelling on oneself, and there's the possibility of separating and rejoining, and the bliss of union, which is different from the bliss of identity. You can feel the difference? I am, and I am blissful. I unite with bliss, which is as much I as complete, two oceans uniting, which can be a completely different order of bliss, of expression of bliss. So the divine moves to manifest himself, enter into multiplicity, lose itself into multiplicity, in order that through that multiplicity it can return into unity. Through union, not one, but infinite unions, all merging into it. Infinite oceans merging together, and the bliss of that union is something so extraordinary. But a union which continues because it never merges totally. It plays at relationships of infinite delight. So the whole universe is as if born out of this delight, in order to manifest delight and the play of delight through all these infinite possibilities of play. But as a first step, in order to experience separate units, there is the extreme push of self-loss, which is possible because there is nothing other than the divine. And so one can go all the way into self-loss and still be safe, because there is no other possibility other than that. And so he experiences fully his freedom to lose himself, always knowing himself. So it's like this, when you're playing with a little child, let's say a 3-year-old comes to you and says, let's play, let's wrestle, or let's do this game, let's play chess, 10-year-old perhaps. What do? Do you put your full energy into it? Do you throw him over within half a second? I won. You withhold your energy. You withhold your intelligence. You bring it to the level of his play, and you play as an equal. You make yourself as incapable as he does. Right? But all the while behind is the full strength, full intelligence, full capacity withheld. Now set aside as if forgotten, but not really forgotten. Isn't it? for the purpose of the play. In the same way, the divine withholds its completeness, fullness, autarky, infinite potential, and projects a tiny point of incapacity, weakness, helplessness, self loss to the extreme, and not one but billions and billions and billions, unendingly, infinitely. An infinity of infinitesimals, each of which is still a special projection of the same one, but now in a condition of helplessness, from which gradually the emergence and the rediscovery of itself, which is an aspect of delight, can begin. And that we call evolution. So when you look at it this way, for the purpose of the delight, for the expression of delight, and the possibility of infinite variations of play of delight in full freedom, therefore, this expression. And we are in a kind of a halfway stage, half awakened. Even as we seem to suffer, we truly within enjoys the whole journey. In the same way as when you go to watch a movie, you know it's a movie, you know they're actors, you see them bleeding, you see them suffering, and you weep with them, and you enjoy it. And you clap at the end of the drama, and you say, oh, what a brilliant performance. And the actor, when he plays this role of great suffering, inside he exults, what a beautiful performance it was today. So something in the level of the soul, whatever may be the external experience of life and suffering that we experience as ego, the soul within says, this is an interesting experience. And it does not suffer. It never suffers in this sense. Its only suffering is when the personality goes against its choice. Then it says, but this is not what I wanted. When the personality is so perverted that it does things which are contrary to its purpose, and then it suffers. But even then, it is fully free, and it knows it's another color of the experience of discovery, of overcoming, and so on. So it is almost like a domain of adventure created out of that divine consciousness, and then into which the divine enters to experience the joy of growth and play. This is the true sense of the word Leela. You may have heard this term in the yogic tradition. The whole world is a play of the divine, and the word we use is Leela, the play, the divine play of joy. Does that make sense? Yes.
It also, the more playful you are then in your life, exploring, experiencing, to enrich your own this life.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. The only thing which matters finally is the exploration and enrichment and growth. Interestingly, the instinct within us is precisely for that. As little children, we are curious. We want to know. We want to explore our world. When we become adult, we put artificial barriers and limits to ourselves. But still, you notice the things which we find interesting are the things which give us a sense of growth. So if you go to a play, a drama, a movie, it's interesting, it's fascinating. As a teenager, perhaps you go to a theme park and you ride the roller coaster. It's fascinating. You want to do it a second time and a third time. And then by the 10th time, probably you're fed up with it. And you see others do, okay, they're still kids. Now you're mature. It's no more interesting, right? So something like that happens. Yes, yes. You notice that you lost interest after it reached a point where you were not growing anymore. You were not learning something new, right? And then you move to something else which gave you a novelty or some new learning or experience. If you go to a music performance, a ballet, which you've seen before, you go a second time or a third time, you don't tire of it, especially if it's of a very high standard. Because each time it's as if you grow in a different way. Something new is absorbed, something new emerges. And if you've gone to a very bad show and a great show, what's the difference subjectively within you? If you go to a boring lecture and an interesting lecture, what's the difference? Your perception. But what is it that made you feel it boring? You know what they're saying that makes it boring, or at least you presume. But notice when you go in and you come out the same, that was boring. When you said you know what they are going to say, it's because there was nothing new, no growth. When you go in and you come out a different person, having grown, that was interesting. Interest equals growth. They're identical. And so you notice this is so deeply set within us. The fact that we need growth to be interesting. Life is interesting when we are growing. Time seems to pass fast when we are growing. Sometimes you say, oh, it's just a week. It feels like a year has passed. Because in that 1 week, you grew as much as you would in a year, perhaps. And that was interesting. And when you say, oh my God, 1 month, it feels time is passing slowly because you're not changing, you're not growing enough. It's boring. Life is boring because you're not growing. And at that point, you get restless. You want to do something which will help you grow and make it interesting again. So interesting is growth. All evolution is interesting.
When the soul leaves the body,
Mhm.
goes on its journey,
Yes.
would that be possible to see it?
Yes.
Take on some kind of form, or is it just
Yes.
some kind of energy?
Yes. Yes. So the transition after death, immediately at the time of death, there is a separation from the physical body of the entire rest of it. That means your subtle body, including your vital body, mental body, and all these things are separating. And so you can still see it, almost nearly physical density. And what remains behind is the densest gross substance and a little bit of the subtle physical which is attached to this. But the bulk of it separates. And at that point, the person is conscious. So, depending on the nature of the separation, if you listen to or read of near death experiences of people who had accidents, they find themselves floating in that same area. They see their body fallen, they're wandering around, they can hear everybody, but people can't see them. That's because they are in their subtle physical body. So it's of the same density as the material, but it is subtle enough that it cannot be seen by normal people. If there was a clairvoyant there, you would see it. He would see it. So at the time of separation, somebody with a clairvoyant sight and not too developed, it can be a very gross clairvoyance, will see the separation taking place. Similarly, if you're asleep and in deep sleep, the subtle body separates briefly. Sometimes it's just floating a foot or two above the physical, and there's a line, a cord which connects. They describe it as the silver cord. You can see this if you have that clairvoyant sight. Occasionally, the form may move and wander around as if in a semi somnambulistic state. That also can be seen. If somebody in the subtle body were to come in here, a more refined clairvoyance would be able to see the person also. And so with beings of the subtle worlds. So at the time of death, there's this first separation at a very gross level. But subsequently, the densest layers are shed bit by bit. They as if dissolve into their own domain. And there is increasingly a separation of the subtler and subtler levels. So in that transition, the person has the experience of transiting worlds. And in each world, experiencing things corresponding in vibration to his own consciousness. So in the immediate release from the material, if I was full of very gross desires, I would find myself resonating with the domain which is full of those desires. And if they are full of hatred and anger, I would find myself surrounded by things of hatred and anger. If I had fears, then I would see those very things which I fear. And that's what is described in the Christian tradition as the purgatory. It's a passage through these domains, and these are the heavens and hells which most of the religions speak of. But they are just passages between those worlds. And that's why they say if you've purified yourself sufficiently, you don't go through these. You go through the heavenly regions because they correspond to the beauty of your own thoughts and emotions, but eventually, when you pass rapidly through them, into finally, when all those layers are separated, you as the soul, inmost soul, and some part of the mental body, mental consciousness which is retained, is you, who can wander freely around and experience the universe in that domain or even move to other domains, depending on how developed and conscious you are. But eventually, after that, even the soul goes into a kind of a trance, withdrawing, and it's a state of trance in which all the experience of the life is slowly absorbed for assimilation, molding itself, reforming itself, and then it turns once again towards the next line of experience and chooses the line of development and life. But the transition is continuous. There is a gradations of substance all the way.
Would that be like where reincarnation would happen, or
Yes.
some other form?
So at the time when, so there are two possibilities. One is the soul may choose to wander in the subtle worlds and experience those as its domain of experience. But eventually, beings of the earth are souls which chose to experience this reality and the evolutionary possibility which is unique to this reality. The other domains also have their own possibilities of growth, but not the evolutionary possibility that this domain has. And so those souls eventually want to take birth because that's the larger purpose. And at that point, when they choose, because there's already a sense of direction of the kind of life experience you want, and yet there's a gap from that domain to the most material, then there's a turning of consciousness and a kind of leaning and a kind of a magnetic attraction with the domains which have those vibes which you seek or which resonate with you. And so you get pulled into towards the material domain. There are also beings who help you to choose, to find your right place. And so then, depending on the maturity of the soul, it may connect at the time of birth. It may even come beforehand and prepare the fetus while it is still in formation, infusing itself gradually into the form, even molding the form as it develops, infusing its development of consciousness into it. Or it may join after birth. So there's a lot of variation of possibilities there.
Wow.
Yes. It's a wonderful universe.
Can I also ask,
Yes.
you're saying that we're dreaming, that's reality.
Yes.
So is that
All dreams, all hallucinations represent domains of reality. But they are domains which are non-material. And when we conflate them with materiality, then we get into a mess. So when you say people see things and it's all unreal, yes, it's not materially real, but it belongs to domains of subtle worlds. Even if they're subjective domains, they're still real in that domain. So in the dream, what we experience often is a construct of impressions which are within us, forming images and forms which are limited to your own perception, as if you yourself project on a screen what is in your mind. Okay, so that's a subjective perception, and yet it's real within that subjectivity. Somebody from outside can perceive your state and what you're seeing, but they would see that as your personal experience of the world. Or if you're more aware, more awake, you can actually reach out beyond your own projections and see the universe on those levels and interact with that reality. And so two of us could meet in the dream world, dream state, and do things together and come back with similar memories.
I'm just thinking that around the time of both my parents are dead and around the time of their anniversary,
Mhm.
they actually really had dreams.
Yes.
Just
Yes. And sometimes it may happen, so not only you remember them or dream of them during the anniversaries, but sometimes it happens you've forgotten the anniversary, the dream happens, and you remember, oh yeah, this is the anniversary. Has that happened to you? Yes.
Not with my parents, but
Yes, with others, yes. And there's a reason. Why the anniversary? In fact, here in the ashram, the mother gave a lot of importance to the birthday. And the idea was, she said, the earth comes back to the same place in relation to the sun. Of course, in space, everything is moving, but in relation to the sun, we are back at the same point where you took births symbolically, because everything material is symbolically representing truths of higher levels. So, symbolically, it's as if you are restarting, re entering life. It's a new birth, a possibility of a new birth when your soul is most open to make progress or to receive help from the divine. And so on that day, if you're conscious, not spilling yourself in partying, but you remain centered and even soul centric, you can even discover your soul more easily, enter in relation with the soul, or receive or deepen your relation with the divine consciousness more easily. So on those occasions, anniversaries, even those beings who have passed on in the subtle worlds, there's a kind of an alignment, a linking that seems to happen. If they choose to, it can happen more intensely. Until they have taken birth, then it may fade out. Yes. It's happened in some cases when we would remember the person and feel vividly, and then 1 year suddenly it just stopped. And after that, we've never felt vividly the same thing. We can tap into the memories, but no more that vivid connection. So the sense was that she has taken birth.
can I ask you about
Yes.
the acceptance of these different levels of consciousness?
Mhm.
And it's very much accepted here,
Yes.
but in the West, it isn't.
Yes.
And the cases of mental illness or
Mhm. Yes.
schizophrenia and stuff like that, those are
Exactly.
experiences that
Exactly. A lot of people who are locked up in mental asylums, schizophrenics, hallucinations, are people in whom the subtle sight or the subtle hearing has opened, and either they are being harassed by lower beings of the subtle worlds, or they're unable to distinguish between those realities which they perceive there and the material world. And so, very simple solution rather than locking them up is to close those gates of perception, which can be done by simple means. Medicines do them by very harsh, painful means. They dull the brain, they dull the gates of perception so much people don't like the medicines because they dull everything. Your whole perception of life becomes so cloudy and gray. But that's the way by which we hammer in the closure. But there are other ways to close them much more directly, much more easily, using means which we would now classify as occult or even spiritual. One of them would be under hypnosis, for example. Under hypnosis, one can intervene and close those gates very quickly, very simply. Occasionally, though, the people enjoy that opening and call back those entanglements and connections. And then, of course, you can't help too much. And madness, what you call madness, is only when not only there's a relationship with some mischievous beings of the lower worlds, but also an entanglement where the beings enter into you and take part possession of your, especially the surface nature. And for example, if you notice you have a strong impulse of anger which comes out of nowhere, perhaps it's happened to you also. As you feel depression, you can get infected, you can catch anger. Where did it come from? I don't know. It came after I met that person. And it could be that you just caught that energy which has hopped from that person to you. And you'll notice when you have that infection of an energy, for no reason at all, you pick a fight with somebody, often someone whom you love, and you expel that energy and you feel relieved, and now it's no more bothering you. And that fellow is infected. she or he passes it on. You can feel it actually. You can feel that transmission. And you kind of are relieved once it's thrown out of you. So there can be energies like this, but there can also be sometimes conscious beings which attach yourself and don't let go. And then they harass you so much. And these become all these cases of madness and all that. But it's possible again to cut those connections. But from this perspective, they are all just entanglements of levels of reality, unhealthy perhaps. And so they need to be dealt with in a more direct and humane way. So modern psychiatry is still in in an infancy, still an experimental science rather than with a deeper insight. Where a psychiatrist who's he has himself certain abilities, so he's able to intervene in certain cases, but he found that in some cases where his intervention was not effective enough, he took the help of some tantrics. Now in India, in the tradition of the tantra, there was a lot of knowledge of occultism which was inherent to that tradition. It's not central to the tradition. The central purpose is still self-realization. But along with it, because of the approach, it had developed a lot of knowledge of the occult domains and the ability to influence or control things of the occult domains. So there are people who still carry that knowledge. And so he asked the help of certain tantrics whom he knew were trustworthy. And he narrated how in certain cases, the tantric came to his clinic and immediately pointed to a particular person and said, "Oh, that person, he is under such and such a spell. And if you look on his waist, there will be a thread with some amulet which is tied. You get him free of that and he'll be free of the spell." And they actually found the person had an amulet. And once that was cut off, it was free. He was free. So there are things like that. Of course, this was a physical connection, but sometimes there's an astral connection. And the tantrics were able to see and intervene quite effectively in many cases like that. So it seems strange, but that's the domain which in Europe was rejected as witchcraft for a large reason because of misuse of the knowledge. But evolutionarily, all of this knowledge was withdrawn, if you see, in the last few hundred years. It's been expelled literally from the collective consciousness. And there's a reason for that. Because all these intermediate explorations of the occult domains were interfering with the deeper and higher truth, which is to realize the divine consciousness and manifest that. And people had got into these magical domains to fulfill desires, to call beings of the lower worlds to do this or that, to fight each other, and all kinds of things, which only added to the chaos and confusion, rather than freeing from the lower to realize something higher. And so, in the overall movement of evolution, there is a wisdom which intervened to eliminate and wipe out much of that knowledge so that we could go back to something which is more true, cut through all this clutter. And this is the only reason why in the spiritual life they discourage explorations of the occult, because it's a distraction which entangles you more deeply with things which are still of a very superficial and intermediate domain. They don't liberate you. You become enslaved to the very devices that you take help from.
So you see, this Patanjali says the same thing in
Yes.
chapter 3 of the
Yes.
series. He says that you need to let go as well.
Right. Yes. Although, as a result of your growth of consciousness, certain abilities spontaneously emerge because they are natural to that level of consciousness. So, as you enter the awareness of a cosmic consciousness, automatically you begin to sense people's thoughts and feelings. Not only you can sense them, you can even influence them because they're a part of you. But it's natural, and it's natural to a consciousness now which is widened. So the question of misuse does not arise because you experience it differently also. But if you, as long as you have those perceptions by occult means, it's still I, the little ego, using a technique or technology which others don't have to my advantage. And so there is a misuse. Mhm. 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 Yes, yes, yes. Yes, it's interesting theme. When people commit suicide, you'll notice it is always in under influence of something compelling, overwhelming their own logical and higher perception. It's as if they're clouded, they're confused, they have lost clarity of perception. That's when they commit suicide, because it's never the intention of the soul. The soul chose to enter life, wants to experience through the journey of life, but the soul also can be trapped by the layers of personality if they're not attuned to it. And the surface ego, desire personality, the desire soul asserts itself too strongly, and the inmost soul is not mature enough to overcome that. There can be a kind of a conflict. And in this surface part, even if there are reasons for unhappiness or depression or whatever, if the personality opens to influences from outside which are harmful, generally the suicide is caused when an influence comes from outside which is intending to harm, uses this moment of vulnerability to put a strong idea, to put a strong feeling, and compelling the person to suicide. I remember one case which I had met a lady who suddenly, at a time when she was very depressed and you're vulnerable at that point, she heard a voice that said, "Now go here, do this, pick up this rope, tie it in this way," and pretty much getting her to hang herself. Fortunately, her boyfriend came just in time and prevented it. But she was just blindly following this voice, as if hypnotized by that influence. If we had the occult clairvoyant sight, we would often see the being which has attached itself, which is pushing these ideas, compelling, and the soul doesn't want it. So, normally, if the soul is sufficiently awake, it will push through, cut through this cloud, and put a ray of light. And suddenly, the person stops at the last minute. What am I doing? And it ends there. But if the clouding is too strong and the light is not able to get through, then the unfortunate event can happen. Mhm. Yes. Mhm. Yes, 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 yes. Mhm. And medicines, often certain of these psychiatric medicines, because they're psychiatric, they may dull perceptions of subtle worlds, but because they're acting on those parts which are mediating, be mediating between the subtle and the physical, they may also open vulnerabilities, and people don't know the distinction. So things can happen because your logical faculties have got dulled, but some other level you've been opened, something, an influence can get in and mess you up completely. Which is often what happens when people take psychotropic drugs. They don't realize that even one incident where you've entered, that the drugs have opened you to those subtle worlds, but you're still an ego person, unable to manage this sudden opening, you can be exposed to harmful attacks from beings of those worlds. And once they get in and they make a hook, they make a connection, although you may be off drugs the rest of the life, through that connection, you may be tormented by them, not realizing that they got entry in that one moment when you opened the window. But the window is not fully closed. So it needs a different kind of intervention to cut that connection and close that window. So that's the reason why in all the spiritual traditions, they make very strong criticisms of these means, precisely for these their dangers. On the other hand, they serve a purpose when the personality is so hardened that it does not see anything beyond its little dense perception. In a very controlled, way, if there is somebody who has the knowledge and the occult knowledge and the capacity to protect you, they may open some of these gates of perception to give you a glimpse of things beyond your narrow perception of life, and thereafter use that occasion to help to develop a different turn of your aspiration. But it's always so risky, it's better not to attempt that.
For example, the shamans in
Yes.
Central America.
Well, the problem is now, because it's become a very popular pastime, everybody is now a shaman making money, claiming to be an expert, but they just feed you the stuff, you get into a high. They don't have the occult knowledge.
Create the safe environment.
Right. So a skilled person would create a safe environment, occultly creating a ring of protection, but also put you in a state which is your highest aspiration, so that you open to that domain. What happens is, under the influence of the drugs, you open to whatever is your normal state of consciousness. And if at that moment you were depressed, you open to the hells rather than to the heavens. But even if you open to the heavens, they are just relative grades of consciousness. They are not the spiritual. The spiritual is something beyond that. And the spiritual lineages, traditions always aim at that rather than these intermediate. However heavenly and beautiful they may seem, they're still domains of the relative, not the absolute, not the transcendence, not the freedom of consciousness. You can get entrapped in the heavens as much as in the hells. But here the goal is liberation of your consciousness. Once you're liberated, then you can wander through all these realms. Because you're free, you can no more be entangled. Then, of course, you can do what you like. So we are at a cusp, even in evolution and in the journey of human knowledge development. We're at a point of a cusp, a transition where we are beginning to rediscover these domains. And humanity has as if lost faith in rationality. The modern age was defined by the promise of reason, which said, with logic, with science, we will solve all the problems, we will have peace, we will have happiness, there will be nobody who has any lack. In practice, we have only developed more skillful means to perpetuate the same old imbalances and distortions. We've not become happier. And so there's a kind of a fading of the faith in science and logic and reason. And there is a turn even to a kind of a subjective quest. Follow my own bliss, follow my own aspiration or desire, or whatever form it takes. Turning in to follow something. But Sri Aurobindo describes this passage from the age of reason through a passage of a subjective age, where subjectivity is more important than the objective. But there is a false subjectivism where you take your own personal desires or even something of your inner soul as you. And then you can be misled very badly. But we should not stop until we go as deep as we can to the inmost soul, the true person that you are. And when from there you recast your life, then begins, through the passage of the subjective age, the spiritual age. And when a large part of humanity is able to re-establish themselves in the deeper truth of their being, then the whole earth makes a transition into a spiritual age. That is imminent, because evolution has brought us to the brink of this transition. And that's why you see everywhere on earth these ideas of some kind of a new age, new world, new consciousness, golden age, etc. It's not happening. We're seeing things getting worse. And yet we feel that is so close, because it is in fact close. But it requires us to make a transition in our consciousness And if we continue in the current phase, then the pressure of circumstances will compel a breakdown, not only of the environment, but even of ourselves, because everything is part of one unit. You destroy the earth, you break down in the process, because we're connected. And so there's a very dangerous passage, even, where even a large part of humanity may seem to be choosing to destroy itself, while a smaller part of humanity is choosing to rise, to develop itself, and a kind of a split taking place. And the choice is ours, which we choose.
Do you need a certain proportion in order for the change to be successful? If the number is too small, there's not enough intention.
The transition will take place even if the numbers are small. The question is at what cost? To the earth, to humanity, to everybody. So if the numbers are higher who choose to make a positive change, then the damage will be less. The damage is already done so far, and it's going to get worse. The question is how much worse? What we have damaged so far will take 50 or 100 years to undo. But if we continue like this for another 5 years, it'll take 200 years to undo, perhaps. So there's an urgency. But the inevitability is also there, and it will be, even if with a small number, the transition will take place. But whether it will be with small islands protecting themselves from a larger domain of darkness, or it will be a large lit up awakening of the whole of larger part of humanity with islands and pockets of darkness, that choice is still in the balance. And there the numbers will matter. And it's not whether you follow a system or practice or even you believe. An atheist can be spiritual in consciousness if he is serving truth, justice, beauty, love. Forget God, forget soul. I don't believe in any of those, but I believe in true love, true harmony, something of true freedom. But true, it has to go all the way to something which is essential, which transcends the relativities and narrow ego turns. And then he's as much spiritual as somebody who's going into deep meditation, perhaps. So your beliefs don't matter here. Within religions, you have pockets of darkness as well as pockets of light equally. So even the framework of the religion is not so important. Yes. You see, in the religions, almost every religion is going through a kind of a crisis. And the pockets of light are where the turn of the religion is towards spiritual experience rather than following the rule and regulation of the book and the belief system. Where that shift has been made, you see light.
Because all the systems are breaking down. Communism,
Yes,
now
absolutely.
capitalism,
Yes, yes.
Central Africa, all the Arab Springs,
Mhm.
all of those things are broken down.
Yes. So we see a huge breaking down of all systems, all structures, all organizations, and showing us that we cannot solve the problem by organization, by law, by regulation, by compulsion. We can only solve it by some kind of an inner, essential, subjective, fundamental change. And that's why we can say it is inevitable. The transition is inevitable. The only question is at what cost? That's where we make a difference. When we have chosen a life of a spiritual development, the practice of yoga is one of the most effective means of developing consciousness rapidly, consciously, deliberately. And then in our own space, there is a rippling effect. Because of the shift we make, it influences our circumstances. And when enough of us are able to make shifts in our own circumstances, there's a kind of a synergy that forms, and it pulls up the collective consciousness overall. So don't get confused by the appearance of increasing chaos and confusion. Don't let that blind your sight. You should see through that, because that's an inevitable in the passage. See through that to something else behind, which is preparing and even forming itself from the grassroots and emerging quite strongly, very firmly. The future is bright. The passage may be difficult. Yes.
How do you, if that transition is made, what do you think that means for the future? If that shift in
Okay. So what will it, you mean in form, what it means for the future in the forms? So Auroville, which you are exploring now, was created as a model township precisely for this, to create a space on earth where what is the inevitable form for the future can already begin to be realized. It's not perfect, but it's a beginning. And the foundations are spiritual. The framework of living is decentralized, non hierarchical, community based, in harmony with nature, sustainable, ecological, and so on. Even the models of finance are different. There are various financial experiments ongoing, including pure barter, shared accounts, no money, all kinds of things are going on. They all represent the forms which are still being developed for the future. And we will see increasingly formations of communities all over the world. The communities may be virtual communities. We may be linked through the tools of the internet, perhaps. But still, there are communities where we connect with people who are like minded, who share similar aspirations, and together we support and nurture each other. And that inevitably takes form in a material organization of sharing and caring for each other in some form. So we're going to see much more of that happening all over. The basis of it will be a mutuality, a sense of a fraternity, a sense of connection on a deeper layer, which is not just interests, because interests are just aggrandizing the ego. Let's get together for shared interests and we form a group ego against the rest. Whereas this emerging consciousness is inclusive, unifying, because it knows oneness with all. So it is not against anyone. And yet it brings shared interests and to help others, recognizing their priorities and our priorities, but still not separating or cutting off. And the internet is one of the most powerful vehicles to assist the organization, the material organization of this consciousness. I will even go so far as to say the internet has been formed by the pressure of this consciousness as one of the vehicles or tools by which it can organize human life more effectively. So I think on that positive note, we can pause.